Toy Story. You know it, I know it, everyone on planet Earth basically knows Toy Story. Like, how could you not know Toy Story? It's one of the most successful film franchises of all time. It's up there with like Star Wars. If you're a kid, an adult, doesn't matter. You know Toy Story, you probably love Toy Story, at least the first two. You love Toy Story. Now, Toy Story 4 is coming out real soon, and I'm moderately excited for it, but I thought to myself, is there a better time to review every single Toy Story game? No, there isn't, so I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna review every single Toy Story game. I'm talking all the console ones. I'm not talking about no Game Boy or iOS or whatever. I'm talking all the main console Toy Story games. And I've played some of these games as a kid. Some of them I've never even touched before or even heard of before I started this series of reviews. But let's just get right into it with Toy Story 1 on the Super Nintendo. The first Toy Story game that is going to be looked at is just called Toy Story. It was released for the Genesis, Super Nintendo, and PC. I actually have very fond memories with this game. I remember booting it up on my dad's Windows 98 computer back in the very early 2000s, and this was one of the first games I ever played. I remember it being really hard, but I also remember really loving this game and playing it for a long time. This is probably the first time in 15 years that I'm actually sitting down to play through it again. I lost the PC version I had all those years ago, so I'll be looking at it on my Super Nintendo Classic. And all three games, as it was on Genesis as well, do have some differences, which I will go over later. But after all these years and never coming back to play through it again, do I still like this game? Or is there a reason why I never played through it for over 15 years? Well, I think I found the answer. Let's first start with the plot. The plot is basically the original movie. It has a ton of iconic moments and scenes from the movie, and I would say it's a pretty decent recreation of the movie. There isn't every scene, there isn't too many either. And of course there are a couple scenes that are missing from the movie, but as a whole, I think they've pretty much nailed everything. Of course I love Toy Story 1. I've seen it probably over 50 times. It's one of my favorite movies ever, period. And I'm glad that despite it being on Super Nintendo, they were able to put pretty much the whole plot of the movie in the game. Like, it's pretty much all there. My only little issue, it's not even a big issue, is there's a little too much text for my liking. There's not enough pictures, to be honest, especially for a kid's game, not enough pictures. Too much text. But other than that, it's pretty much the original movie. So Toy Story is a 2D platformer where you play as Woody. One or two parts of the game you don't play as Woody, but yeah, you primarily play as Woody. Woody can run around and throw his string and jump. His string can be used as an attack on enemies. Usually it will just stun them for a short time though. He can also use it in the air. Additionally, he can use his string as like a grappling hook and swing off certain points off these hooks where he swings off them. The levels are all based off the original movie, and naturally, being a toy, everything's pretty big to you. Some stuff like chairs or seats are absolutely giant for Woody, and you have to platform your way over them. A majority of these levels see you going from left to right, just trying to finish it, fighting off enemies you come across, and difficult platforming challenges. Woody himself can take 5 hits. After 5 hits he dies and loses a life. There are checkpoints in the game, but they are not in every single level, and I'll just be honest, most of them are pretty sparse. You can collect these sheriff stars to give Woody 1 hit back, however these are pretty rare. There are also hidden lives in these levels, but again, exceptionally rare. In all the levels there are also stars. There are 50 per level. These are sometimes laid out across the level, and sometimes they're just hidden really well in these levels. If you get 45 of the stars, you get another hit point, as in you get another gold star. If you get all 50 in a level, you actually get a continue. Yes, a continue, so if you lose all your lives, you actually get to continue. This is very valuable, and it makes it worth it to collect all the stars in as many levels as you can. While most levels do have you going left or right, there are a couple that have you going back and forth, such as getting all the toys hidden before Andy shows up. There is also 2 stages where you're on RC in a top-down fashion, where you have to go through a little obstacle course and collect batteries so the car doesn't die. There is a stage in the game where it actually goes into first person, and you look for the little aliens inside the claw machine. There is also 2 levels where you're on rails and it's a auto-scrolling level, and it's moving like automatically, usually riding something or trying to get away from something. And there is even a mission where you're trying to get into Andy's car at the end of the movie. So it's not just primarily a 2D platformer, there are a number of levels where they do mix it up. Strangely enough, all 3 versions of the game actually have different levels. The Super Nintendo version has the first person level that I mentioned, but is missing this driving level where it's like an old school racing game such as Outrun. The PC version, the one I played as a kid, has this level, but it's missing the first person level. Now the Genesis is actually the best version of them all, as it has all the levels. Why all 3 versions are different, I got really no idea, but it's an interesting tidbit. I guess the last thing to bring up for the gameplay is that there are a few bosses in the game. These are just kind of annoying, to be honest, and are simultaneously present no challenge while also being hard, and I'll explain that in a minute or two. But that is the general gameplay for Toy Story. It's kind of a classically styled platformer, point A to B, kind of left to right, with a decent amount of variety in its levels. When it comes to the presentation, this game actually looks a bit better than I remember, to be honest. It uses a style of graphics that was very similar to Donkey Kong Country, and while I think Donkey Kong Country and Super Mario RPG have aged better in the graphics department, this still looks okay. All the character models look crisp enough, and you can tell what everything is supposed to be, so I think it looks fine for the models. But they are a bit rough around the edges, to be honest. The animation on them is also not the best, as it can be very choppy and just generally low frames. This is the part that hasn't aged very well with the models. The backgrounds are all pre-rendered as well, and they all look fine. They all are basically just still images like Donkey Kong Country, and I think they do a good job of representing the movie at least. You can tell what everything is supposed to be, and nothing looks totally out of place here. I think it was fine for what it was. The first person part, despite how blurry it was, I still think it was still decently impressive for the Super Nintendo. The frame rate was rock solid for the most part. I don't think I dropped any frames like at all, or at least not that I can recall, so that is always a plus. And there are a couple times in this game where there's a lot of stuff happening on screen and the frame rate doesn't drop at all, really, which was decently impressive. The sound was also decently impressive, I thought. The part that's impressive is the sound clips. The sound clips are just quotes from the movie, but they're actually very clear for the Super Nintendo and sound pretty alright. I think it's decent. All the sound effects are pretty good as well and are all of high quality. The music is shockingly good. Like, I'm impressed with how good it was. I remember it was okay back when I was a kid, but I went back to it now and I was like, wow, this is actually pretty bumpin'. It was probably better than I even remember it. Well, the PC music, that is. You see, the Super Nintendo uses cartridges, obviously, as well as Genesis. And the PC version used a CD-ROM. So naturally, the sound quality is going to be way better on the CD-ROM. All the music you've heard throughout this review is the PC version, which easily has the best music of the 3. Not to say the other versions have inferior music, but yeah, it's inferior. It sounds decent enough, and the tunes are still good, but the PC version just like literally blows it out of the water. As a whole though, I think it's actually pretty good. A lot of them, like I said, are pretty catchy and bumpin' actually. It's better than what you might expect. Now it seems that maybe Toy Story actually is a lot better than you would expect, especially for a mid-90s licensed game. But this game has some serious issues that really take it down a peg. Despite having a massive amount of nostalgia for this game, I am very easily able to see the issues that this game has, and while I still love it due to my great experiences with it as a kid and growing up and really just all that general nostalgia crap, I can say this game has some real problems. Not one thing I remember very specifically, remember as a kid about this game is that I thought it was the hardest game I've ever played. Sure, I hadn't played any games really up to that point, or at least I don't really remember playing any games up to that point, or very few of them, but I remember as a kid I thought this game was impossible, and I came back to the game and I can say this game is actually ridiculously hard. Like, it is shockingly difficult. I thought it was hard as a kid because I sucked, but no, either I still suck at the game as much as I did back then, or this game is actually really difficult, and I think it's the latter. And pretty much all of my issues in the game can be attributed to the difficulty. I think my first issue with the game is the precision. The precision that is needed for many things in this game is just downright ludicrous in some areas. When I mean precision, I mean jumping on very specific spots to land, or a platform, or to activate something. It needs to be very specific. Like when you're pushing the toys up into the toy box. Like, how did I even miss that? or when you're throwing the string, it needs to be very specific to what you're going to throw. If it's even a frame off, you're just going to miss. The part with Buzz later in the game where he is doing these karate chop arms, which does happen in the movie, might I add, and you're pushing enemies back by hitting them with said karate chop arms, requires literally perfect frames. Like, that's the only way to put it, is it requires perfect frames. If you are one tiny frame off, you're not going to be able to push the enemy back, and you're probably going to get hit. And it was just extremely difficult because you need to be so accurate and perfect. So while Woody has to be basically as perfect as possible when it comes to the platforming and being just generally precise, the enemies don't have to be this way at all. What do I mean by this? The hit detection is very poor in this game. There were many times where I know I did not get hit by an object or an enemy, but this game said I did. And thanks to the Super Nintendo Classic Rewind function, I can actually see if I got hit, and I can confirm literally nothing hit me, or I was not even near what was going to hit me. It's totally bogus. The hit detection is just bad, straight up. You get hit from stuff that you should not have gotten hit by, end of story. You can even see here in this footage. And this is what I meant earlier when I say that bosses are simultaneously challenging and easy. They're easy because they have easy patterns, they're easy to dodge, or they're just generally nonchalant. However, due to the hit detection, you'll end up getting hit by their attacks when you know you were dodging it. It's just borderline bugged. And I hate using that term, especially for an older game, but I clearly wasn't even touching the boss, and I'm getting attacked from it. My next issue is that the string swing, when you grab onto stuff with your string like the hooks and swing off it, it's just bad. The precision issue I mentioned from before is in full effect here. If you're not exactly frame perfect with that string, you will miss it. Not only is it really hard to actually get your string on it, but then it's in such a quick manner you just fly right off. You aren't even given enough time to realize what's going on, and the controls are so slippery during this. And then you swing, when you have to swing from one hook to another, like, good luck, because that is just hard in this game, and it takes a decent amount of practice. At the end of the game, there are a couple levels where you have to do very precise platforming with these hooks and the string swinging. And these parts just made my hands tense up real bad, not due to how challenging they were, but just how finicky this entire swinging system is, and you could just die right there. You don't even, like, take damage, you just die if you miss one of the jumps. It's just not fun and not very good at all. My next issue with the difficulty is that they don't give you enough of the screen, honestly. There is just too much screen crunching in some of these levels. They need to zoom it out quite a bit. This only applies to the auto-scrolling levels where you ride Rex or the skateboard. I found myself frequently getting hit by stuff that I literally had less than 1 or 2 seconds to react to. Like, it's ridiculous. And then there's just some stuff where if you do not know it's going to be there, you will get hit. It's just trial and error. Like, look at this entire picture. How was I supposed to know this? That there's rockets flying at the top and bottom of the screen, there's cans bouncing on the ground, and then the freaking dog is coming after me. Like, it's just ridiculous. I don't know how you're supposed to do this on not even your first try, but like your 5th try. It's ridiculous, and it could have easily been fixed by just zooming it out a bit. My next issue is when you're in the top-down levels with the RC where you're driving, the controls are just terrible. The car can just not turn correctly for the life of it. It's either too loose or too stiff, and you just end up bouncing all around, hoping you make it to the end. It just controls like crap, and you frequently will get stuck on the environment. When it comes to the difficulty in this game, it's really just all over the place. Some levels are much harder than others, and it's not in any sequential manner. It's literally this level is just, the level's just hard, the next one isn't as hard, and then the next one is hard again, or it's just a mix of those options. It's like not sequential at all. It's not starts out easy, then gets gradually more difficult. No, it's not like that. It's just extremely inconsistent, and it led me to just resetting my Super Nintendo Classic a bunch to do the rewind. I'm not afraid to admit it, I reset this game probably 50 times to rewind and try again, so I wouldn't get a game over, because if you get a game over, you gotta start the whole game over. What is this? I have no idea how a kid is supposed to beat this game all the way. It's just too difficult. The only reason I beat it as a kid is because on the PC version, they actually give you a level select, and you're able to start every level with 5 lives and no continues. I remember I couldn't even beat 2 levels in a row on the same 5 lives. I doubt I could even do it now, honestly, because there is just so much crap in these levels. The difficulty is really the main issue with the game. If it wasn't so difficult, this game would be like an hour long, maybe an hour and a half at the most, but because of the difficulty alone, it's extremely variable, and you could probably double that time. It's way longer than it was probably intended. I'm not afraid to admit it, but this is one of the hardest Super Nintendo games I've ever played, and it's almost all for the wrong reasons. Whether it was getting hit by stuff that clearly wasn't hitting me, the precise platforming, or just awkward string swinging, or just downright not being able to see what is going on, I thought it was really difficult and just basically unfair. As a kid, I hated how difficult it was, and after all these years, I thought I honestly just sucked, but like I said, or previously mentioned, the issues that were said before, like, just make this game actually unfair for the most part. But overall, how do I feel about the game? Honestly, I'm kind of a mixed bag with this game. Of course, deep down, I still love it and cherish it because of the memories it brought me as a kid, but reviewing it, I can see that this game has some serious issues that prevent it from being an all-time classic. It could have been so much worse, that's for sure. It's still an alright game, but I'm not going to say it's great or even that good. It's just, at its very best, okay. And at its worst, it's an unfair, infuriating just mess, really. If anyone else played this game as a kid, I would love to hear their opinion on it, as I'm sure I'm not the only one who played it as a kid and thought it was extremely, stupidly difficult. All in all, it wasn't that bad of a licensed game, especially for the time. For the time, I think it was a pretty decent and good licensed game, but in general, I don't think it's an amazing game. I think it's just, again, okay. But, luckily, Toy Story, when it comes to games, would be on the upswing after this one. So after Toy Story, we of course got the mega sequel that is the much universally acclaimed Toy Story 2, one of, if not my favorite film of all time, just due to nostalgia and how great it holds up. It was the first movie I ever actually saw in theaters. I know that at least. I just love the movie. There's really nothing to not love about Toy Story 2. And we again got another game to tie in with the movie. Again developed by Traveler's Tales, and again basically put on everything at the time. Toy Story 2 was released and has since become kind of a highly praised game by fans, especially people who grew up with it, especially for a movie tie-in game. It was on everything released at the time, like I mentioned, N64, PC, PS1, Game Boy, and Dreamcast. We will be looking at the Dreamcast version, which I have right here. Hey, it works. Don't judge me here. The Dreamcast version has the best graphics of any of the versions, and I'm only looking at this version. So Toy Story, when it comes to plot, literally follows the movie. It follows it extremely well and doesn't really miss a beat, to be honest. I guess it's the perfect story then for a movie tie-in game, as it perfectly follows the movie. It has even scenes from the movie in it. They're of course compressed a bit, but they still look good and it gets the movie's plot across. It is pretty great. So the gameplay of Toy Story 2 is a 3D platformer collectathon. The game sees you play exclusively as Buzz, and you go through 10 fully open levels as you go to save Woody, in addition to 5 boss levels. So while the last game was all about Woody, this one is all about Buzz. Let's talk about what Buzz can do. Buzz can jump, double jump, and grab onto ledges. He can also grab onto little poles or something dangling as well. He can shimmy up it and jump off those. He can also grab onto other ledges and swing off them. In addition, he can grab onto downward lines to slide down them. When it comes to combat, Buzz has a lot more options. He has his laser, which you don't want to be near when it goes off. You can shoot it continuously, or you can charge it up for a super blast. Buzz can also spin. He can charge this up as well, however, after he does a super spin, he does get dizzy for a few seconds. He can also do what is basically a ground pound to hit switches on the ground, or to be propelled off something. So while that might be Buzz's moveset, it's the levels that make this moveset interesting. The levels are all completely open like Banjo-Kazooie. The main goal of the game is to get the Pizza Planet tokens. In every level there is 5. One token is retrieved from Ham, the pig. He gives it to you after you collect 50 coins in the level and find him.
In the levels, there are tons of coins to collect. They'll be lying around, and you'll also get them when you defeat enemies. The enemies are mostly standard evil-looking toys and go down the generic route and are relatively easy to defeat. Another Pizza Planet token is retrieved by finding 5 of something in the level. For instance, in one level it's find 5 of the little green aliens, another one it's 5 toy rats. It changes every level, but it's the same idea where it's find 5 of something. Another token is rewarded for defeating a mini-boss. In every level there is a mini-boss to defeat. These usually aren't very hard at all, and it's just blast them as fast as you can or spin them as fast as you can, honestly. There's really just not much to them at all. Another token is given to you for doing some race theme objective. Sometimes it's literally a race against something or someone, I guess, and other times it's to collect a few of something within a limited time span. It again varies per level. Lastly, the 5th token in the level is different for every level. Sometimes it's a puzzle, sometimes it's getting somewhere like high up. It literally changes every level. That one is pretty much completely unique. These levels, they're not huge, but they're decently sized. They have a lot of platforming challenges present in them that will sometimes test your skills. This game isn't a walk in the park because it's a kid's game. I've got to say that some of the platforming did challenge me, and it definitely would challenge anyone on the first time, I think. I didn't play this game as a kid, so I don't have this ultra great or difficult memory of it as a kid, but I'm not afraid to admit that a few parts did get me. The platforming is really, though, just unlike everything else. Even the other Toy Story games. To say you feel like a toy is an understatement. I love how small you feel because these levels are literally just normal locations made interesting because you're so small. Like Andy's backyard. It's literally just a backyard, but it's made awesome because you've got to avoid this deadly lawnmower, blow up a rubber duck, and platform up a tree. It's stuff like this that makes me really like these levels far more than I anticipated. Now, I really like the exploration aspect to the levels with the collectibles. In addition to the tokens, there are lives to find, batteries that refill your health, and a laser power-up, where Buzz is a limited number of charged-up laser shots. The last thing worth mentioning in these levels is the power-ups. Mr. Potato Head is in a lot of these levels where he's missing a body part, like his mouth, shoe, or arm or something. If you find this body part for him, you'll unlock a new power-up. These power-ups can be speeding up Buzz tremendously, hovering, or a grappling hook. These power-ups are incredibly situational and are not used very often at all. However, because of this, if you want to get every Pizza Planet token, some backtracking is actually required, yeah. Some tokens require a power-up that you may not have gotten yet. But I will say this only happens like 3 or 4 times in the game, honestly. It doesn't happen very much. Lastly, to mention, I guess, are the boss stages. While there are mini-bosses in this game, those usually just have you spamming the laser or spin quickly. These bosses are a little more complex. Not too much more complex, but they usually require you to do something before spamming them with the laser or the spin. Or they have you dodge hella, like Zurg. I think the bosses are decent enough. But that's the general gameplay of Toy Story 2. It's a fun platformer where you collect stuff. Surprisingly, there's actually no mini-games or different types of gameplay like many other 3D platformers. It's just straight up Buzz start to finish.
But I don't want to use my head!
When it comes to the presentation, I'm really just not entirely sure. Like I mentioned, the Dreamcast is the best looking version, but despite being the best looking version, I don't think it looks that great. I think it just looks alright at best. The game came out in 2000 and is a game that came out around then. It just doesn't exactly look stunning. The games like Luigi's Mansion and Tony Hawk Pro Skater 3 would come out like around less than a year later and look much better than this. When this game originally came out in '99 on the PS1, I think it looked pretty good in most aspects, but the Dreamcast was a lot more powerful than the PS1, and it showed with games like Sonic Adventure 2 or the other NBA games on it. So it looks fine, but not amazing for the Dreamcast. The models all look decent enough, but are a bit blocky. They still all look good, but they just could look better. Buzz and Woody's faces, I just don't even know what went wrong there. They just don't look very good. I will say something that is an amazing level of detail is when you go first person to shoot your laser. Yes, you can go first person. You see Buzz's face reflecting, which is just a wonderful detail. The environments all look pretty good, honestly. Everything has a decent amount of detail, and everything represents something in the real world for the most part, and it's all pretty good. I don't really have any complaints when it comes to the textures of the levels themselves. I think those are all good. The frame rate is not so good, though. I had it frequently drop, especially at the beginning of the game. It was going down to like 20 FPS. Usually it was able to stay around 30, but it did drop a number of times on me, and it did take me some time to get used to it. It wasn't perfect by any means. Unfortunately, the draw distance is not amazing either. It reminds me of shooters on the N64, and it just isn't that great. And again, this is a Dreamcast game. It shouldn't be like this. It should be better. If this was on N64 or PlayStation, I could see it a bit more, but the draw distance, it could be a lot better. And that's why the graphics are just kind of mixed. There's some good there, but there's also some bad. When it comes to the sound, though, this is not the case. It's all pretty great. The voice acting is all pretty superb, honestly. While a lot of the lines are just taken from the movie, they're still really good lines. They just get repeated a lot. I think all the lines are still good, though, and some of the original stuff that is here as well is also good. But like I said, it can get a little annoying when they start repeating the lines like crazy. The audio quality was good for the most part, as it's CD. During the movie scenes, it wasn't amazing, but it was decent enough. The sound effects were all really good, and I think everything just felt incredibly right with them. Some of them just feel incredibly accurate to the movie, like when Buzz's wings come out, and I just generally like them a lot. Now, the music in this game, I'm not going to lie, it's actually really good. I'll be honest, it's got some really bumpin' tunes in it. Some of the tracks, like The Airport and Andy's House, are just really good, and I think it's actually really quite superb. It's almost shockingly good. But the first Toy Story game had really good music in it as well, so I was expecting something decent here. Wasn't disappointed. There is a couple licensed tracks here, but it's mostly just the OST, and the OST is awesome. It makes me actually really feel like a toy, even though that's not possible. The only complaint I have for the sound is I did have some sound glitches where the audio would cut out or the music would just straight up disappear, but in general I thought the sound was very good. But now it's time to talk about what wasn't very good. When it comes to issues, I actually don't have too much to complain about. I'm not going to be here forever. I think it was pretty good for the most part, but of course it's not perfect. Like I mentioned, the pop-in / rendering and frame rate wasn't very good. That's some presentation issues. The game isn't particularly long. To 100% it even. On your first time to 100% it would probably take around 6 or 8 hours. But I've seen people 100% this game in literally less than 2.5 hours. But I guess that's not a huge issue, as it's targeted towards children. Some of the levels, though, in this game, I'm just not a big fan of. Most of them, I will argue, are pretty good. However, a couple of them, I'm just really not a fan of, like this alleyway level, and of course the elevator level where you're just going straight up. I mean, it was cool for a bit, but it just got really tedious to me. But it was nothing too big. Honestly, my biggest issue with the game comes with the Dreamcast version. Now, when I first started playing the game, I actually thought that something was wrong with my controller, because whenever I would use the analog stick, like, Buzz would never just walk straight. He would constantly be sort of going to the left or right, like just very slightly, and he would not actually run straight. I tried both of my controllers and was like, what is wrong with my controllers? The ones I get just be that worn? Like, no other game does this. No, I looked it up. Actually, this is just nothing to do with my analog sticks. It's just actually horrible. Buzz literally just can't run straight with the analog sticks. He's just all over the place. And it sucks because I like the analog sticks on the Dreamcast, and I had to use that crummy D-pad it has. It wasn't truly horrible, but I just much would have preferred the analog stick. And how is this even an issue where the analog sticks don't work right with a game? Like, but the D-pad's fine. I'm just confused. Also, there's no right analog stick on the Dreamcast, so controlling the camera is with the triggers. Normally, I wouldn't really have any issue with this, but the camera is extremely slow and just honestly fights you. It's just not that great, and it was only made worse by this controller. When you go first person to shoot, the controls are permanently inverted, which is also annoying. The controls are easily the biggest part of, like, the biggest issue with this game, and are just a hindrance, really. And you know what, I know the PlayStation version honestly doesn't really have any of these issues. Of course the camera's still slow and it's still inverted in first person, but the only issue the PlayStation version seems to have is that the textures are really washed out and blurry, not these control issues. The Dreamcast version is a lot more crisp and clear and looks better, but in the end, I'll be honest, I'd rather sacrifice that for better controls. I'd rather have the better controls than the better graphics, and I would actually say if you're going to play the game, play the PlayStation version of this game. My biggest issue with the game is straight up the controls, which are basically gone on the PS1. But that's really my issues with the game. I'll be honest, I think this game is extremely overlooked and underrated. The game got decent praise when it came out, and has been considered good, but over time it's become kind of a cult classic, and it's a fan hit, especially for all the people who played it as a kid. And I can see why. It perfectly captures the movie. It's fine, really. It's got good levels. It's got some pretty bumpin' tunes to it. No, I totally get it. There's a reason this game is so fondly looked upon. As a kid, I would adore this game. I think it's actually a pretty good game. It's not amazing or mind-blowing. It doesn't reinvent the wheel. It doesn't do anything crazy or anything, but it's still a really solid 3D platformer. And I'll be honest, there's just been nothing else that I've really played like this, especially for a 3D platformer, even compared to the other Toy Story games. And in general, I think it's again, a good game. If you like Toy Story and haven't played this, I don't even know what you're doing, to be honest. Like, if you like Toy Story and you want to play a Toy Story game, like, this is the game to play. It's actually also on the PS3 on PSN, so it is widely available on at least a somewhat modern console. And I don't think it deserves to be as overlooked as it was because it's a movie tie-in game. I actually think the game is quite good. Sure, it has some issues and it could be a bit more polished in some aspects, specifically the presentation aspects, but I think as a whole the positive qualities stand out much more than the negatives, and this is definitely my favorite Toy Story game of all time. Now, I had never played this game up until now. There's no nostalgia talking here or anything. I think it's actually a quality platformer. Like, it's just a quality game. Again, it doesn't completely reinvent the wheel or do something new, but what it does, I think it does well, and it has some really good levels in it. And I think it's honestly worth it to give the game a shot, because it is a bit unique. You could do so much worse than this game, especially for platformers, on the PS1 as well. And it's like, next time you're at a garage sale or a flea market, if you see this game, I would honestly say to really consider it, because I had a pretty good time with this game and I just definitely had some fun, and I'd recommend it as a whole. But what would be next for Toy Story games, you ask? Well, before we go to the next main Toy Story game, I think it's worth it to do a quick review on the spin-off game Buzz Lightyear of Star Command for the PS1, PC, and Dreamcast. I'm sure someone would ask me in the future to look at this one or say I missed it, so I'm going to look at it right here. It is based off the TV show of the same name that starred Buzz Lightyear. I'll be honest, I never watched this show at all. I think I watched 1 or 2 episodes as a kid, and that was it. I just stuck to the movies, so I don't know anything about the story, setting, characters, or the Buzz Lightyear lore, or any of that other than Buzz and Zurg. The story of the game seems to be just Buzz fighting Zurg and his minions in what I assume are episodes of the TV shows, and they use the levels as context. I just assume this. I didn't watch the show, so I don't know, but I'm going to just say that this is fine. Seemed fine enough. There really isn't anything to it. It's just go fight the bad guy in Zurg. Now, when it comes to gameplay, this game is just so weird. It is a racing game. I don't know either. The game is like Crash Bandicoot. It's extremely linear. It's basically a straight path for all the levels. You're trying to get to the end of the level before the bad guy to fight them in the boss fight in their lair. You're Buzz the whole time. Buzz can shoot from his weapon, jump, and strafe. You pick up coins in the race to use on shortcuts and new ammo types. You also pick up ammo as you don't have infinite ammo minus the stock weapon. You also pick up health blocks for more health. You don't regenerate. You can shoot pretty much everything and just blast it all up. Like literally anything. The ammo types you get are all pretty similar, to be honest, and don't feel very different at all. There is vehicles to ride as well, and these give you a huge speed boost, and the controls are really loose on these. These levels are honestly really basic. I really don't have anything to say about them other than that. They're all extremely straightforward. They feel very similar, and they occasionally have an alternate path, but they're mostly just literally straight lines with tons of enemies plastered all over them, and you just got to get through them as fast as possible. The boss fights in this game are interesting. It really amounts to just shooting them as much as you can and defeating them before they defeat you. Besides racing the antagonist on each planet, there are other challenges to do on each planet. There are rescuing the little green alien people in each level, which there are a few of. There's also a challenge to get hella coins in each level. And then besides racing, there's also time trials you can do for every level, which is a basic time trial. You just get through the level as fast as you can. Lastly, there is getting your buddy's parts back and putting them back together. These parts are scattered around the level, but they're nicely laid out for you with an arrow marker to tell you where they are. You see, after you finish one of the 3 main tasks, you get a medal. Saving the aliens or getting the hella coins, like I mentioned, gets you half a medal, which is just weird. Now, to progress in the game, you need so many medals, of course, and so you're going to be doing other challenges to get more medals, because you need so many medals to progress, and you're not going to have enough from just doing the races. You're going to have to do these other challenges like time trials. So, padding, thy name is Buzz Lightyear of Star Command. When it comes to the presentation, this game, well, it looks pretty bad for the PS1, to be honest. I'm certain this is the worst looking version compared to the Dreamcast and PC, but this game just looks bad for the most part. To start with a positive, the rendering is actually pretty good. You can actually see really well far ahead of you for the most part, except the boss fights. Not really sure why that is. The frame rate was smooth, actually. It wasn't horrible, or there was no slowdown, none of that. It was good. But besides that, the graphics were not very good, like at all. They look pretty ancient nowadays and have aged terribly, but even for back then, they weren't that great. This game came out in like 2000, getting near the end of the PS1's lifespan, and it looks older than that. Toy Story 2 looked better than this game, to be honest. The textures all look incredibly flat. They're polygonal and have little to no personality to them. They don't pop at all, and some of them are just really ugly and muddy. The character models look, again, worse than Toy Story 2. They're super polygonal and just look bad. They all have incredibly stiff animation and don't even look like the cartoon, to be honest. Buzz in particular just looks horrible. He's like cel-shaded for some reason, but he's like the only cel-shaded thing in the game. It looks really off and just jarring. Like the Looney Tunes games on PS1, like Sheep Raider, got it right. This game just looks horrible for cel-shading, and it's only on Buzz. He looks a lot better in Toy Story 2 than this one. His animation is just really janky as well. The graphics just aren't good. At least the cartoon scenes from the show look good, and the frame rate is okay in this. Those were pretty alright. The sound was pretty meh in general. The voice acting, I will say, that was actually good. It has the correct voice actors here for Buzz, and everyone else sounds alright. It wasn't total crap, and it was fine to me. Everyone sounds like they tried, at least. The music is a different story, though. It's extremely generic and forgettable. There's no classic Toy Story music at all here. Lame. And the music is lame. I have nothing to say really for the music. It's just ultimately forgettable. The sound effects, again, forgettable and nothing special. I just don't have really anything to comment on here for the sound, since I don't even remember it and I just played it yesterday. So that's probably really bad. Speaking of really bad, let's get into that with this game. I'm just gonna be honest, this game is not very good at all, and it's aged even worse. The controls are just bad. They're incredibly imprecise. Buzz turns incredibly slow, almost like a tank. You want to use the strafing to turn, really, because the turning just sucks, and if you bypass something and have to turn around to get it, good luck. Buzz is just really sluggish as a whole, to be honest. Once you're on a vehicle, the controls get even worse somehow and are extremely slippery. They just don't feel right at all. You slide all around like you're on ice. It doesn't feel natural, especially compared to Toy Story 2. I never got a good grasp on the controls at all, to be honest, and I just felt like I was getting by with them and not actually getting better. The course design is, again, really basic and does nothing interesting in the slightest. There are just so many enemies plastered on these levels, and literally it just leads me to running past them as fast as I can to try to get through this race. I can't fight all these enemies. I'm running like I don't have time. It's a race. Why are there so many enemies? And they don't do like any damage, so I just try to run through these levels, taking as many hits as possible, trying not to lose all my health, and I don't even fight the enemies. Why are there so many enemies? It's a race. The boss fights are awful, like truly crap. There is no lock-on system, so you constantly are fighting the camera to get a proper view of the boss to shoot him. The camera is so bad in these fights, it's ridiculously bad. The fight itself, it just sucks also. You just blast the boss for the most part. There's almost nothing different about any boss. Just blast them over and over and over again. It's not engaging, it's not interesting, and it's just annoying and tedious. Like I mentioned also, there's even padding in the game with the medals. But then, with the padding, it can still be beaten incredibly fast. People have beat the game in, like 100% the game in like 3 hours. I beat, and they can beat it in like half that time, like without even 100%ing it. I honestly did not finish the game. I got pretty far in it, but I had enough of the game, and I just put it down. The sloppy controls, poor level design, / bosses, and being just generally bored led me to quickly turning it off. I mean, I played a decent amount, got pretty far like I said, but I didn't finish it because I didn't like it. I thought it was bad, and that's why this is just a quick review and not some in-depth review, as I don't think I have enough experience with the game to go truly in-depth. I wasn't even originally going to look at this game. I figured, it's just a little spin-off. And you know what it is, and I just decided to throw it in here. Like, yeah. I mean, I was curious about this game, and I found out the game sucks. It is such a bad concept to begin with. Like, who thought this was a neat idea? Like, it should have been an awesome platformer like Toy Story 2, not this racing crap. Like, what is this? The only other on-foot racing game I can think of is Sonic R, but that game was way better than this. Or at least it had better music than this. Yeah, no, this game didn't sit well with me at all. I did not like it, like, at all. I was generally bored, especially compared to the previous games. Maybe I'm in the wrong age group here, but I can see a kid getting extremely frustrated with this game due to the bad controls, sliding all around, needless padding, and just awful boss fights. This game isn't worth anyone's time, to be honest, and it's quite possibly, if not the worst Toy Story game ever made. I don't really have much to say besides that. The game sucks. The end. But, you know what? After this, we would actually get another racing game based on Toy Story on the PS1. The next main Toy Story game that we're going to be looking at is a bit of a strange one. It's Toy Story Racer, released for the PS1 in late 2000. It's really weird as it came out well after Toy Story 2, but is only based off the first Toy Story movie. I'm not sure either. There is no real story to the game, it's just after the first Toy Story. So let's look at the gameplay. The game is a kart racer, but not in the traditional sense at all. It's more like Micro Machines as opposed to karts or cars. Like if you played the Micro Machine game on NES, it's like that, I guess. The cars turn pretty much on a dime and swerve all over. There's no jumping or going into a drift, you just turn normally like that. They're not very fast, but they have really good acceleration. They're also tiny, so they bounce around off everything. Like literally you just bounce all around. There's really no other racer like this that I can think of, or at least on the PS1 that I can think of. The controls and the way the karts just control in general and move around require some practice and getting used to, but in the end it's really unique and I actually like it a lot. It's super different from the norm. The tracks are all based off the first movie and are all pretty representative parts of the movie. They're all usually pretty concise and tell you where you're supposed to go. It's so unique because you're so small also. The courses give off this wonderful like toy feel. They're all just basic, normal, everyday places, and they're made exciting because you are toys. Most of the courses are pretty great, with tons of little twists, turns, straightaways, and even a few shortcuts. I actually quite like the tracks, and they're made much more interesting thanks to the controls. All the bouncing around, again, is just totally different from anything else. Like, instead of ice physics, it's where you're on tile, which is just pretty great all around. In addition to these, there are items you get in the game, but these are nowhere near Mario Kart levels. They're all pretty standard, to be honest, like missiles, targeting items, just general basic, generic kind of items, with a little bit of Toy Story flavor like the 8-ball, and then there's the speed boost. But because the cars accelerate so fast, they don't do much as a whole. You see, the items are seemingly placed at random on these tracks, and they disappear at random. They just literally go into the ground. But most of them, they'll slow you down for like a tiny bit, but you'll be back at top speed in literally like 2 to 3 seconds. Like, it's used to gain just a little edge, and that's it. Like, it really comes down to skill and the boosts. On all these courses there are batteries, and when you drive through them you get a massive speed boost, and it's also an item you can pick up from one of the randomized items, it seems. But these actually give you a huge speed boost and are the essential to winning. You need to know when and how to use these to maximize your speed gain. These are way better than like all the items that you get in the game, and the ones on the tracks are necessary to win. That's the general driving though, it's definitely different. So what will you do in the game? Well, you see, you first pick a character and then you do a mission. You see there is this big tower of blocks, and each block is a mission for that character. First off, I will say all the characters control the same. There's no stats or anything. Every character also has unique missions, air quotes. Basically, only certain characters can clear certain missions. Some of these missions are really basic, like win the race, or it might be win a tournament, so it'll be a couple races. Some of them might be where last place gets eliminated every lap, so again, just win the race. Some of them might be win the race without getting hit by an item. Some of them might be a time trial of sorts, or beat the clock kind of challenge. But when you aren't doing one of these, it's usually hit the opponents with items. Some of them are just survival type missions where you're in an arena and you just have to eliminate everyone by hitting them with items, but the same goes for you. Some of them can be track the other racers down themselves and you hunt them down and try to hit them with an item or just bump them. Or it could be a tournament point-based mission where you just try to get as many points as you can. You get a point per knockout. Well, my thoughts on these later. In the game, there are 200 missions, actually. 200 missions. When you complete one, you get a green army man. You need these to unlock more missions, characters, and tracks. Since it's only Toy Story 1, the characters are the most classical of Toy Story. There's no Jessie, Bullseye, or even Zurg. But yeah, they all control the same. Now, while there might be 200 challenges there, that means there isn't 200 unique challenges. A lot of them are reused. There's also the multiplayer, which I didn't try. I have no one to play this game with. I'm sad. Anyway, on to the next part of this look at here, which is the graphics and the performance. First off, this game actually ran great. I never had any frame rate issues, no rendering issues. It was great. It was honestly kind of shocking that I had no issues in the frame rate. It was just totally smooth here. No issues. The tracks were all rendered well in advance, and I had no issues there either, which was just awesome. The graphics as a whole actually come off pretty good. Like, coming off the end of the PS1 lifespan, I still think it's good. Everything is a decent amount of detail, and while it's not the most crisp image, of course, it's still relatively good for the PS1. The textures were all decent, and they had enough detail, really. Yeah, it was a little blurry, but I didn't really have any issues with that. Also, you're going really fast on these tracks for the most part, so you don't really have too much time to examine the detail. But some of the details that you might see that are related to the movie are really good. Like any of Sid's houses, like any of the courses there at Sid's house have the dog, which is just awesome, and any of the details at Andy's house, I love it all. There's a lot of fan service here for that, that's for sure. The models all look really good, and again, I just have really nothing to complain about here. Everything looks how it should, and it has a decent amount of detail, especially for the time. The animation was pretty superb for the carts as well. The sound, I think, is actually really well done. All the sound clips are taken from the movie, of course, but they're at least high quality sound clips, I will say, and they're all fine. A few of them they seem a bit inappropriate for the context, but they sounded nice and were decent enough. There does not appear to be any original lines here, but again, it's totally fine the ones we have. I mean, it's just alright. The sound effects were superb though, and actually had a decently high level of detail, honestly. The carts are great. I love all the noises they make, like when you go into the air, the noise where it's like, zoom. It's pretty great. When you drive on the dirt, I just love all the noise. There's nothing to complain about there. The music is surprisingly alright. It's not amazing or as good as Toy Story 1 or 2 in the music department, but it's still pretty good. There's actually some really good themes here. My favorite is this kind of spooky theme that plays in Sid's attic. I think that's pretty good. Some of it is a bit generic and honestly forgettable, but not all of it, and there are a couple that I think are alright. It definitely caught me off guard. I did not expect any good music at all, but I was pleasantly surprised. Alright, now, speaking of pleasantly surprised, this game honestly has no right to be really any good at all. I figured it was going to be just some shovelware garbage, but it's actually a really fun game with a really good presentation, I might add. But you see, not everything is amazing with this game. First off, the missions where you have to take out the other drivers with items are just not very good. Most of the items are extremely inaccurate and very difficult to hit with. You'll often miss and just drive around looking for items to hit them with, only to miss as well. These are often just very borderline annoying at best and frustrating at its worst, and they only get worse the further you progress in the game, as you have to hit more opponents with more items and go for longer. There are some stages where you have to chase the opponents down like I mentioned, and these are just tedious and take forever. They are not fun, and I did not have a good time doing these. They just take forever. However, not all the challenges of this, I'd say only like a third of them are these survival type arena missions. But again, speaking of missions, this is definitely a quantity over quality instance, as a majority of these missions are basically just repeats of other missions with slight variance, if any at all. Most of the time, it's basically the same thing, and sure, a lot of it's fun, a lot of the time it's fun. But after so many times, basically doing the same missions, yeah, it's going to get repetitive. 200 missions is a lot and nothing to scoff at, and it can just honestly get kind of boring. Some missions seriously take like 45 seconds, and other ones can take upwards of 15 minutes. It's extremely varying, but the bottom line is that it gets old, and if you want to unlock everything, you have to do like all of them. but for kids, I guess this game would be on their plate for a long time, that's for sure. The game also can get pretty hard near the middle and the end. The AI are not messing around and have some very questionable rubber banding AI, to be honest. As a whole, I figured this game would honestly be really crap, and it's not. I actually had a lot of fun with it. For the few hours that I did play, I had a decent amount of fun, and it's a good racer. Sure, I think the game has its fair share of problems, like I mentioned. The more you play it, it slowly gets worse, but I think it's actually still a pretty decent kart racer. It could have been so much worse, like M&M Kart Racer, but it's not, and I actually liked it. I'd say if you're really curious, maybe try it. I mean, that's the only reason I would say to even think about going back to it, is if you're curious. It's on PSN at least, so it is readily available. But if you have any fleeting interest, I have no problem saying to try it. It could be pretty fun for you. I don't know, maybe the multiplayer is more fun. So after this, it would be almost a decade before we got another Toy Story game. But we did. Oh yeah, we did. So here is the next Toy Story game that we would get almost a decade later. It is Toy Story Mania. I remember getting this game when it came out, actually. Now here is some context for the game. A year or so earlier, before the game came out, Disneyland, or at least in LA, had just finished this ride in California Adventure, one of the staple rides actually of California Adventure, Toy Story Mania. The ride is in 3D and it's a shooting gallery. You're on a moving car and you just try to shoot as many moving objects as you can. Every time I go to Disneyland, I make sure to go on this ride because I love it. Except when I went to Disneyland in Tokyo because it was not there. But the ride is just fantastic and would really be kind of the start of this whole 3D kind of rides that would definitely pick up, especially in Universal Studios. But that's enough about the ride. I'm not here to review the ride, but I can say it is fantastic. This footage is obviously not from me, and whoever it's from, I thank you. So to cash in on the popularity and success of the ride, here we have the game tie-in that was released for the Wii, which of course it was, because that was the console that all the kids would have at the time, and myself included. I couldn't have been more than like 12 when this game came out, and I remember being decently excited for it, because I loved the ride as a kid, and I wouldn't have to wait 5 hours in line to play this game, as opposed to the ride, at least at the time. The game has actually been re-released on other consoles and PC and even iPhone, I think, but I still got the good old Wii version, which is the one I'm gonna look at. So there is no real story to Toy Story Mania, it's just the toys having fun in Andy's room. It was before Toy Story 3 also. Now the gameplay of Toy Story Mania is basically the ride, only instead of pulling back and shooting from a gun, you just point the Wii remote at the screen and shoot that way. Most of the game is very similar, if not identical, to Toy Story Mania. It really is just a light gun shooter, a rail shooter, gallery shooter, but you don't move. It's like you took the shooting minigame from Wii Play and made it its own game. The majority of these minigames are just where you aim the Wii remote at the screen and press A to shoot. You'll be given tasks like shooting so many of something on screen, getting so many points, etc. But generally, again, it's just pointing at the screen, pressing A as fast as you can, and just shooting everything that moves. It doesn't really matter the background, I guess, or minigame really, you're basically just doing that. It's all pretty much just identical, whether you're throwing rings, pies, shooting at balloons, etc., etc. They're all pretty much the same. In between these shooting galleries, there are some different minigames I will add though. These minigames are a little more different than the shooting. These might be balancing a ball, trying to get it through the course and use the Wii remote to control the course and get this ball through the obstacle course, or trying to get enough strength to hit a platform with a hammer, sending the little green aliens to space. They're all really basic. Like, these minigames that aren't where you're shooting are just really basic, to say the least. Like, to say the entire game is basic is a bit of an understatement. I mean, that's really the whole gameplay. You see, you just shoot everything that moves, do these little mini games that last maybe 2 minutes, and I will add you can do everything 1 to 4 players, of course, and this game is much better with multiple people. I remember having fun with my siblings back playing this game as a kid, but coming back to it now, in 2019, alone, I might add, it just feels really shallow and kind of depressing, to be honest. I pretty much seen everything in the game and what it has to offer within an hour. I basically finished its entire story mode and unlocked everything in free play. There's no incentive actually to getting any higher scores, it's just to complete the tasks, which you can do very easily. The game is just a shallow party game through and through. I would actually say that We Play and We Party are actually much better party games than this. I mean, this adds a little bit of entertainment at most, but those games really added a decent amount of entertainment, while this game, honestly, it just made me want to go on the ride more, which was more fun. I would even say actually Carnival Games on Wii offers more party fun if you're really even going down to the bargain bin level. But hey, enough with that. Let's talk about the graphics. There's not too much to the game, so the graphics are good, right? Not so much, to be honest. They are stylized, and they do mostly look like the ride, so I guess I'll give them props there. But because it's on a static screen, and you're not moving around like crazy and trying to shoot everything, and it's not a ride, I gotta say, it doesn't actually look that great. Like, nothing is any real detail, everything just kind of falls flat. It just doesn't look that polished at all, to be honest. The user interface is also questionable. Really, my main issue with the graphics is when the Toy Story characters show up. They just do not look anywhere near as good as the ride or the movies or even Toy Story 3, the game, which came out a year later. They also move like not at the correct amount of frames, so the game runs incredibly choppy when they show up on screen. Their frames are just bad and it looks like crap. They just don't look good. The models themselves are good, they just don't animate correctly. The music was entirely forgettable. I don't remember a single track. I don't even think there was a traditional Toy Story track, which is kind of jarring, to be honest. But really, there might as well have been no music because I don't remember it. The voice actors were all good. It sounds like it's just about everyone from the movies. Obviously, it's not going to be everyone, but it's close enough. So I guess in that aspect, it was good for the sound department. I have no complaints for the voice actors. The sound effects were all wacky and goofy, really. They're fine. It's a kid's game. There's really not too much to it. They sounded fair, and the sound overall did fare a bit better than the graphics, but the presentation as a whole was moderately lackluster. In fact, this entire game is pretty lackluster. I'm sure with a couple of siblings when you're much younger, the game is much more fun and there's much more to do when you can try to get high scores or something, but like, there's just really not too much to the game, and like I said earlier, I was basically done with the game in an hour. I had really no incentive to go back. It's just a gallery shooter, like I said, and again, like I just also said, many other games on the Wii did this much better, like We Play, Carnival Games, etc., etc. In addition to that, sometimes the Wii Remote, it just wasn't very good in this game. It usually is fine with me when I play Wii games, but this game, it really just wasn't that great. It was unresponsive and many times it just didn't really work. Like, it said to shake it, I'd shake it like crazy and it would only work sometimes. It wasn't even great in that aspect. I can't really recommend this game to anyone since there's just so little to it, and if you want to play a Wii shooting gallery game, you have better options. I can say that this is probably the worst Toy Story game. It rivals that Buzz Lightyear game. But that game was bad for a number of reasons. This game really just has one giant issue, and that's that there's nothing really in it. It's a bargain bin cash grab third-party Wii game that's basically just garbage, and that's what the Wii was known for. This really feeds into that stigma that the Wii had just mostly crap, and this game is a prime example. I'm sorry, I had good memories of it as a kid, but nowadays I can just see that there's just nostalgia left. There's nothing really to this game. I'd recommend you play basically any other Toy Story game over this one. And yeah, that is a bit sad that in the end there really isn't any positives to this game. It's just kind of shovelware. But at least I have some nostalgia to the game. That's something. In the end, what do I really say? Just go ride the ride at Disneyland. The ride is way better. It's also about 500 times more expensive since the game is like $1 now. But at least we wouldn't have to wait that long for the next Toy Story game, which came out a year later. So here we are with the last full-blown Toy Story game up until this point. It's Toy Story 3, which was released in 2010 with the movie on like every platform out at the time. I got it on Steam and will be reviewing the PC version, which is about on par with the PS3 and 360 versions, minus any downloadable content like Zurg and more. When it comes to the story, the game takes place after the movie, and basically it has Ham retelling the story of Toy Story 3 with some added bonuses. It's really strange actually, as it does not do a very good job telling the movie at all. There is little to no context. You pretty much have to have seen the movie to understand anything that's going on in this game. But to be fair, if you're playing the game, you've probably seen the movie already. But if you have not, do not play this game, watch the movie instead. Personally, when it comes to the movie, I think Toy Story 3 is just okay. I was never actually very big on it, especially certain parts of the movie which I thought were just borderline way too mean-spirited and just sad for its own good. Still, it's a good movie. I just don't like it anywhere near as much as the first and second one. The game adds a bunch of areas where someone like Bonnie or Andy is playing with their toys and they're actually using their imagination. And so a whole level is created from this, and this is where it gets pretty off the walls and has some really weird stuff going on that isn't in the movie. But in general, the story is just pretty meh, to be honest, at best. It's just not a very good retelling, honestly. I feel they could have done so much better, and surprisingly there is not one scene from the movie in this game actually. Not one. So for the gameplay, the game actually has two modes of play. One of them is the story mode and the other is toy box mode. Let's go over the story mode first. So in the story mode you play as Woody, Jessie, and Buzz depending on the level. Sometimes you get all three at your disposal and you can switch between the three. The game is mostly a platformer with occasional third-person shooting. Most of the locations are set during Toy Story 3, but like I said earlier, some of them are just totally made up. Most of the time you'll be platforming and just trying to get through a generally linear area. Sometimes you'll be doing a few mini games to complete the level, but this is only a few times, like driving this car, shooting some aliens, etc. And yes, there is actually some third-person shooting here, but surprisingly it works decent enough. You zoom in with the left trigger and what do you know, everything's actually okay. It's more than functional, but a majority of the levels are very linear with some platforming challenges. Woody, Buzz, and Jessie all have a special ability to them to try to mix up the platforming. Buzz can throw stuff far, including Woody. Woody can use his string to grapple, I guess, and Jessie can jump on precise platforming. It's all very contextual, and the game makes it very obvious when you're supposed to use a certain character. There are 8 levels in the story mode, and they're all pretty short, to be honest. They all feel varied at the very least. In these levels there are optional collectibles like these cards and concept art, but you won't be spending too much time on these levels, to be honest. Not even trying to 100% them, you won't spend too much time on them. No, most of the gameplay in Toy Story 3 comes from the toy box mode. Here in this other mode of play is an open world with missions and tasks you get. Yeah, it's actually an open world. You can play as any of the 3 characters in it and you can explore around. You do missions for other Toy Story characters from the franchise and go through some locations from other Toy Story movies. Some missions include collecting stuff, going through races, doing mini games that were in the story mode over. There's also a bunch of stuff to collect in the open world, such as these coins, where you can buy new levels and mini games once they become available. You can even unlock new costumes and buildings to customize the people in town with. And some of these aren't just Toy Story, but they're actually Disney themed as a whole, like with WALL-E, Finding Nemo, etc. In fact, the Toy Story mode has a lot of Disney stuff in it, as you legit go through the Haunted Mansion from Disneyland in it. The toy box mode is the real mode of play, exploring, doing tasks, customizing the world. It's really, like I said, the main mode of play here, and you'll get the most fun out of this mode rather than the story mode. If you're playing on the PS3, you actually get Zurg, which is cool, I guess. You also get the iconic Toy Story ball to throw around like crazy. But I mean, that's the general gameplay of Toy Story 3. It's not exactly the most complex world, and Toy Box may be the most simplistic open world ever in a video game, even more than the Lego games. Even the Lego games, they have an open world honestly for all ages. Toy Box is just clearly meant for kids, especially with all the customization. So I'm probably not the target audience here. Let's look at the presentation. Toy Story 3, for a 2010 game, it does not particularly look very good. 2010, might I add, was the year we got Mass Effect 2, Red Dead Redemption, and even Fable 3. Maybe that's not comparable, but this game looks nowhere near as good as those games, and it looks like it's about a console generation old. And would you look at that, this game actually was released as a PS2 game in 2010. No wonder it looks like a PS2 game. It really just honestly looks like a PS2 game. It would look right at home on the Wii. The PC version at the very least looks outdated, and it just looks a console generation old. It would not look very good on 360 or PS3. Everything looks just generally outdated. There are a lot of rough edges, particularly in the toy box with the mountains and cliffs. A lot of textures are just quite muddy and generally ugly. It's not all bad, but most of them look subpar at best. The character models were a mixed bag. They all look like their respective characters, which is good, and they all animate fine. The issue is their faces. They are all like stuck to a singular expression no matter what is going on, even when they're talking, and it just looks incredibly jarring. I would say they look like plastic or figures, since they're stuck to that one facial animation expression the entire time, and they don't even like blink, but they are toys, so I guess plastic was the point? I don't know. I really liked the animation though. It was really right at home. It looked fine. It looked about as good as the movie, but of course the movie looks a little bit better. The frame rate was also a bit of a mixed bag. It would drop at random intervals down to 30 FPS or lower, and it would really just rarely be at 60, and it would usually hang around 50, but I'm going to attribute this to a just poor PC port. Speaking of which, do not buy this game on PC. The PC version is just crap, to be honest. Like, not supporting modern resolutions at all. Like, I'm not even talking about my silly ultra wide, I'm talking about basic resolutions not being supported. Getting keyboard prompts when I have an Xbox controller plugged in, or getting told to press button 2 or whatever. The game crashed on me at least a half a dozen times. I'm not exaggerating at all. It crashed a ton. Every time a cutscene would load, the game would stop responding and it would go back to my desktop until it loaded up. You can't use a controller on the main menu. Yeah, this PC port is garbage despite only being $3. Get it on literally anything else, even the PS2, before you get it on the PC. When it comes to the sound, it fared much better though. All the voice actors sound right. I'm sure it's not the original cast, especially Tom Hanks, but it's close enough and sounds good to me. It sounds like everyone is correct, and everyone was pretty great all around. The voice acting gets a pretty high mark here. The music was good and bad. It was good because it had a lot of classic Toy Story music, which of course is all wonderful. Like, Toy Story is a wonderful soundtrack. There's no disputing that. All the Toy Story music is great. It's whenever it wasn't the Toy Story music, it was just something unoriginal, bland, generic, and uninspiring. Like, luckily, most of the time, it's Toy Story music, but like in Toy Box, it was just boring music. But even in Toy Box, you get actually other Disney music, which is good. All the sound effects, pretty kid-friendly, nothing really to say. Yeah, there's nothing really to say in that one. But the sound definitely fared a lot better than the graphics and the PC performance. Now, while Toy Story 3 might seem like a pretty simple little fun game, I do have some other issues with it. First off, the camera is very reminiscent of 90s games, and it's just not very good in many aspects. You just have trouble seeing depth. Like, not even the shadow can help, honestly. There were many instances where it just could have been better. One level in the game, at the dump, it was just horrible. It's my least favorite part of the movie as well, and it's my least favorite level here, and it goes on for seemingly ever, and it's just not fun in the slightest. And it's like the real final level of the game too, so it's like, really? Toy Box, like I stated, is for younger kids. Like, I'm not even talking like E10 rated like kids, like 10-year-olds. I'm talking like even younger. It's very basic and gets rather benign quickly, or at least it did to someone like me. Maybe if I had Zurg on the PS3 it would have been more fun, I'm not sure. But I got rather bored with it quite quickly and found it, again, mostly benign. I'm sure it could be more fun if I was younger, or if maybe I had a second player, but I found it rather dull in a quick manner. Maybe if someone was about half my age with a few years, I'd find it more engaging. All of these aren't really huge issues, to be fair. I mean, except being a bit bored while playing the game, but I think I can attribute that to my age. My biggest issue is definitely the length. The game is like really short, like really, really short. Most of your gameplay will definitely come from Toy Box. I had nearly 100%ed the story mode, like got all the collectibles and everything in around 2 hours. 2 hours. I spent around an hour and a half-ish, not even that, like an hour in Toy Box after, and it said I was about 25% to full completion in Toy Box. I have 3 hours of total playtime. So yeah, you could get more hours out of playtime, you get more playtime out of the Toy Box mode if you really work at it, but that's still not very much game time. Again, I'm probably the wrong demographic here, and I think a kid would get a lot of game time out of Toy Box mode, but I'm just going to leave it at that, really. For me, I was able to beat the game in less than an afternoon. I work shifts longer than this game. In fact, the story mode is actually shorter than the movie. In conclusion, length aside, the game is alright. It doesn't do anything offensively bad. I'll be honest, it just doesn't really excel at much else either, though. It's just extremely average. The platforming is extremely average and quite basic. The shooting is fine. The toy box gameplay is basic, but it's fine as well. It's serviceable. It just doesn't really do anything past that. It's just fine, average, a bit generic. It doesn't do anything great. At the game's worst, it's boring. It's definitely not the worst Toy Story game. It's not even close, though. It's not even close to being the best either. I just feel like I just don't have much to say about this game, and I've just been dragging this review out because there really isn't much to say about this game. Everything that this game does has been seen before, and it's been done much better. And my playtime with the game was like as long as the movie, like I said. I guess I am glad I finally checked the game out. I remember when it came out I was a bit curious about it, but after playing it I learned that I'm really not missing too much. To be honest, I'd kind of rather just watch the third movie, even though I'm not a big fan of it. It was honestly one of the most meh experiences I've had in a while. I think the biggest reason it's meh for me is, again, just due to how old I am and just not being too engaged with its rather simplistic gameplay. But if I was 9, 8, maybe even younger, I'd probably love this game to death, like I do with the older Toy Story games. It's not like it's expensive or anything either, so there's that to it. That's an added plus. But at least the series, in terms of video games, didn't end on a sour note.
And that's it for Toy Story games. Some of them, they were pretty good. Some of them, not so much. But in the end, I think a number of them are worth checking out. Or at least, if you're curious to check them out. And in the end, it's not a pretty bad track record for a series of movie games, really. I mean, I know a lot, much worse track records for other movie series games. But we're not going to go into that. Overall, Toy Story games, they're actually pretty alright for the most part. Some of them really good, some of them really bad. But, as a whole, I gotta say, pretty alright. Now, Toy Story 4, it's about to come out. Don't know, where's the game? I figured there might be a game, but it doesn't seem to be that way, unfortunately. But if there was, you know I'd be looking at it. And I hope you guys enjoyed this review of every Toy Story game. It took a while to make, but I had a lot of fun doing it. So, with that said, see ya. Well, if you made it to this part, you finished the video. Congratulations. Thanks. It took a decent amount of time to make that video. Much appreciated for you listening to me. Now, if you liked listening to me, click the good old subscribe button, the bell, comment, like, whatever. Do whatever you like. I appreciate anything you do, whether it's positive or negative. And with that said, thank you so much for watching. Subscribe for more. Have a nice day.